Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Mondays Down South. Man, guys, I'm so proud of us. We are 20 episodes in, or roughly around that number, 18, 19 episodes in, to a 2024 NFL season. I'm genuinely just so proud of our commitment, guys. We did it. We did take a couple of bye weeks, actually. We did take a couple of bye weeks, but they were much needed. Our hamstrings are healed. We're ready to compete for the Super Bowl here. And realistically, what we have for show to you today is to recap the NFL Conference Championship games that occurred last week, and then also to get ready for the Super Bowl. Now, we have a lot of fun plans because we're going to be in New York City, all three of us, for the Super Bowl, renting out a bar. More information will come out on that. But we are so pumped because this Super Bowl matchup mirrors one that happened just a couple of years ago with the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going to launch straight into it. I was personally in Florida doing some wedding planning stuff. I mean, talking to day of coordinators, doing an engagement shoot at 7 a.m. in the morning at like 40 degrees outside, talking to ordainers. So like I did get a little bit of football in specifically for the Chiefs-Bills game, but I missed the Commies game a little bit earlier. So I'll kick it over to the guys. Cy, Evan, what'd you guys do for the games and how were your weekends?
I'll go first. I'll let you as the Commanders fan. You actually had this weekend, but I, for the game specifically, hung out with Shreya, Nikki, and two of my coworkers. One is a former coworker, moved over to a different company, and another coworker, Nick. So it's Nick and Chris. The whole squad got together. We watched Chris came over. We watched it on our roof with the whole squad, and then we went to the second game at Quinn's on the corner over here in Courthouse. So for any Arlington listeners, I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It was a total vibe. We had a great time. Results may not have been, as great as what the majority of us were hoping for, but at the same time, there were some fun games and some definitely a lot to talk about. I'll put it that way, and I'll let Evan, delve into it before we get too into the weeds.
Yeah, I obviously just locked in from home, had a couple of invites to, various watch parties at bars and places and whatnot. I was like, no, this is the biggest professional sporting event of my life. I got to just lock in from home directly in front of the TV. I went full silent mode on the phone. Usually, as you guys know, I'm always blowing up the group chats. And one of my group chats is, from college is a Philly fan and 3 Commanders fans. So I just went full mute. I didn't want to say anything that was going to make anyone angry, but, locked in from home. And then for the first quarter of the Chiefs-Bills game, I think I was still just absolutely gutted. So I think it took me a little bit to get into the second game, but we got there, and that was obviously a spectacular game. So a little bored about the Super Bowl matchup. Would have liked to seen the Bills make it if my team wasn't going to make it. So should be a good game at least.
I do want to say this really quickly though. I'm sure Zach will echo this, and this will probably be a good way to segue into the first game. But I mean, all things considered, the result, I didn't expect it to be a 30-point game. It doesn't matter. At the end of the game, it wasn't really like, they were playing backups, whatever. That doesn't matter. My point, though, is, and I'm not just saying this to be nice, but to all the Commanders fans, and especially you, Evan, as our fellow podcast host, how much better of a season could you have had? I mean, you could have lost that game 100-0, and it still would be an incredible, like, way above what you could have ever hoped for your first year with Jaden and everything like that. The aura is just good. You know what I mean? It just, everything that happened this year just points in the right direction. And, like, even a couple weeks ago, when I said I thought Detroit was going to win, I said I expect Jaden to win a Super Bowl. I expect him to win maybe a couple. And this just goes to show that to me. And I just genuinely believe, like, even throughout the course of the game when the chips were down, he was very calm and very, like, processing everything. And I think there's something to learn from it, not to be corny, but I genuinely believe that. And I think once you've experienced that environment, especially in a rival stadium, and you can learn from that. And so honestly, it was just an amazing year for the Commanders. Even as someone who isn't a fan of the team, but obviously roots for you guys to be happy. Like, I had so much fun watching y'all, and was blown away by multiple situations. So I'm going to start with that before we even delve into the whole game analysis. Just really like tip the cap to them. Like, what a season, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think it's you never know is the thing. Like I think about the Lions right now, and they're in a situation where they, last year was kind of maybe like the Commanders' year this year, where they made it further than you would expect. They had a good run at it, got close, wasn't quite enough, and then this year was kind of the year where, all right, the expectations are high, and they fail to meet them, and then now they've lost both of their coordinators. The cap is going to rise, those types of things. You just never know, and then injuries could always play a factor. So, one day I'll be appreciative of how great the season was, and but we're not quite there yet. I think still disappointed with how that game went for sure. But what are you going to say, Zach?
Well, it's just how gutting was it that you saw Saquon run for that first rush, right? 60 yards, breaks a couple tackles, does this elegant spin move. It actually reminds me weirdly of the Braxton Miller play for Ohio State against Virginia Tech with like the spin and then turning up the field. And it's just so gutting because you even admitted in the podcast, hey, we know that Saquon's going to eat. If we can just contain him, that's all we care about. And just for him to go 60 yards, it's tough because it just changes the entire game plan. Because, you got to then commit to stopping the run. And then that's when Jalen and A.J. Brown had a good response game like Sinai had predicted. So just walk me through, some of those initial thoughts. Did you think that you guys had a chance? Because your offense stayed in it.
Yeah, I mean, they had a chance throughout several points of that game. Obviously, the Saquon run was a tough start, but I mean, an 18-play first drive, a couple fourth down conversions, it like really looked like we were going to be able to move the ball all game, and that was like kind of true. Obviously, there was a fourth down opportunity there on the first drive where Dan Quinn, he'd already taken 2 shots at it, and he thought maybe he was being a little greedy with a third fourth down, but who's to say if you can go for the fourth down and maybe punch it in for 7. And obviously the big kick return, the Saquon run, but it was, still very confident at that point. I mean, obviously like the 3 turnovers are just like the gutting part is just how poorly they played situationally. And even the De'Ami Brown one, obviously it is what it is. Give credit to the Eagles. Like their defense is so elite at chasing down ball carriers and punching the ball out. So, but obviously I don't think a fumble is ever acceptable from an offensive standpoint. Like you got to wrap up the ball no matter how aggressive the defense is on you. And yeah, they were moving the ball. They got it to 14-12. Big play by Terry after the rough start. The fake punt by Tressway was huge to change the momentum. It was like so obvious too. Like the setup on it. Like see
the whole hand thing before the snap.
Yeah.
I was like, they're definitely doing something here. Like anyone could see that.
Yeah, and they kind of had it covered. And for a punter to make that great of a throw was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So once you get that part, and then you're 14-12, the turning point of the game here is 14-12. Eagles have the ball with 2 minutes left in the first half. 4th down and 5 from about midfield. Commanders run a good blitz, which they had a few effective blitzes with Frankie Louvu. He gets a clean route to Jalen, and then Saquon just bear hugs the absolute mess out of him and takes him down. No call. It was like absolutely egregious to not get a penalty there. And obviously he's one-on-one with A.J. Brown and Lattimore. Jalen Hurts makes a great throw. They get the first down. They punch it in for 7. And then you fumble the kickoff, which is just egregious. And by the time Jaden had gotten the ball back after getting it to within 2, you're down by like 14 points. And at that point, you're in bad shape. But still, in the second half, the defense got some stops and you had a shot. And then Austin Eckler with that fumble, they were driving to make it a one-score game again. And it still probably wouldn't have been enough, with the run game and everything. But just those fumbles and a couple of penalties, I thought the refs were pretty lopsided in that game. I don't necessarily think it. I mean, the Saquon one made a huge difference, but those things are hard to eat. But ultimately, the better team won, and I think we needed some help from the Eagles, and they played a pretty flawless game. I mean, they didn't really make a single mistake all game, so you're not really going to beat them when they do that.
Yeah, and I know Zach. You mentioned you didn't get a chance to watch it, but I'm gonna give us both a pat on the back because I think we both kind of. Like when I think about the analysis we had last week, I think we truly hit the nail on the head with everything we kind of predicted, because genuinely, I was watching and I was shocked because I was looking at what we talked about last week. And we talked about how, when they were running on offense, if Jalen Hurts is capable of playing this game with no turnovers, right? He doesn't need to be exceptional, but if he can move the ball without turning the ball over, this is probably a game the Eagles are going to win somewhat comfortably given the amount of talent they have. And the other thing we predicted was AJ Brown, which you already pointed to. Even though he had a couple bad games, I just kept saying, and you said it yourself, like I just don't think there's anyone on the Commanders who could stop him. And honestly, like Marshawn had a couple decent plays, but he was kind of getting embarrassed this whole game by multiple people, and it didn't help him that he was like getting all like angry. It went both ways. Don't get me wrong.
And the penalty should have been on AJ Brown, to be clear. It actually helped the Commanders because they didn't get the 2, but that was ridiculous
I was
too.
going to say it actually benefited y'all, but in reality, I actually thought it should have been called both ways. I think it should have just been a flag on both guys, move on. But regardless, I'm like, Marshawn, you need like. Then after that, he's chirping at Devontae Smith after Devontae Smith like has a big first down. I'm like, Marshawn, I know you're a dog. I know this is how you compete, but this isn't New Orleans Marshawn Lattimore anymore. And these receivers were taking his lunch money, if you will. And then the other thing that was really impressive was I think Evan's kind of been spot on about how Jalen, for the most part, like it's not like Jalen looks the way he did a couple years ago when they did make the Super Bowl, when he was probably the second best quarterback in the league at the time, right next to Mahomes in terms of how he's playing. But he had a great game, man. Like, for example, that 4th and 5, yeah, Saquon might have held, but for them on that play to throw a one-on-one like fade route and he put it in his bread basket, like AJ didn't even have to move an inch, it was just so impressive to watch. And putting all that aside, I think Evan kind of finished it out perfectly. Yes, like the turnovers ended up biting him in the ass, like, and that was what was it like the big difference. But I mean, I just think the better team won. Like, I think the Eagles just had more leeway to even like get away with some of those mistakes, even if they had made one or two, because they just like they don't have a weakness when Jalen Hurts is playing. Like when he hasn't turned the ball over. Their receivers are probably the best in the league, at least in terms of who was still in the playoffs. They have the best running back in the league, and I'm going to say this right now. Before we get into the Super Bowl matchup, the second best player in this entire playoffs is Saquon Barkley. It's not a quarterback, it's Saquon Barkley. He has been that unbelievably unstoppable. The man averaged 8 yards a carry this game. His over-under line coming into this game was 125 yards for a playoff game as a running back. I'm talking rushing. I'm not even talking rushing and receiving. Like, that is ridiculous. And he still went out there and did his thing. He was sitting at the end, or he would have easily hit the over. My thing is, it was just at a certain point, there's a talent discrepancy. And I think the Commanders obviously made the turnovers, but even if they hadn't, even if one of those calls went one way or the other, it might have been closer, but I still felt like a game the Eagles were going to win. They just kept picking up momentum as we went. And the funniest thing I'll mention, because Evan didn't bring it up, what on earth was Frankie Louvu doing? But it was hilarious, where I don't know if you saw the replay, Zach, but it was hysterical.
I did.
I think he was just trying to like frustrate them when they were trying to tush push, and he just jumped like 8 times in a row, and we were all dying laughing. We're like, I don't know what the objective here is, but it is really funny. And I'll talk about it later, but I know people used to give the Eagles a lot of crap for the tush push a couple of years ago because, the belief was, then anyone else should be able to run it. I think whatever we talk about the call in the Bills game later on or whatever it is, they clearly do it at a level that no one else can do it at. That is very apparent. Even after Jason Kelsey's gone, if it's a 4th and 1, the Commanders stopped it one time and then they just did it again. You just can't stop them on the tush push. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, and also shout out the Eagles defense. They were awesome. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
The Bills do it wrong is the problem. Like they just do the tush. They don't push. There's like no one behind Josh pushing him, and I probably talk about that one later. But they only go left. It's just they do it in the dumbest way. And I don't know, but yeah, Frankie was hilarious. I mean, the only way to stop it is to like just leap over the line. The problem that he was just draining the clock because they had gotten to 1st and goal. It was like 1st and goal from the 1, and you're not going to stop it 4 times in a row. Like I said, they stopped it a couple times in that game, but you're not going to stop it 4 times in a row. So at that point, he just drained an extra minute off the clock, which is why I was a little annoyed. But like he was just like, the only way I could stop it is if I time the snap perfectly and I like get back there, maybe enforce a fumble or something. Because at that point, it was going to be a 3-score game. So yeah, it was funny. I had no issues with it because it's like the only way to really stop it. But unless you can get a penalty, but which they do line up in the neutral zone. They're still like breaking the rules in a few different ways, and the refs just can't see it. But I digress.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say is Marshawn Lattimore is an absolute menace. He is the Dylan Brooks of the NFL. He truly is. Like, he was so much better. Like, Dylan Brooks was so much better when he was on the Grizzlies, and the team was performing super well. I mean, they still are right now, but like, Dylan Brooks was the heart and soul of that team. Now he's in Houston. He's a nobody. And the same thing is kind of goes for Marshawn Lattimore. He just starts stuff to get in people's heads, but he doesn't have the talent to like, support the claim. So that's point one. Point two, CJ Gardner-Johnson has never been a man of character either. Ironically, both of these players have played for the Saints. But I did not like his comments to Jaden Daniels about Cancun University. I just think it's like pretty shallow, below the belt. And, I just think that like things like that are a little bit ridiculous, but I wouldn't expect anything else from CJ Gardner-Johnson. So 2 quick comments there.
I'm going to defend Marshawn Lattimore really quickly. Marshawn Lattimore at one point was an all-pro player who was a Pro Bowler. He's more a Draymond Green type, except not quite as dirty in terms of the penalties he commits. Dylan Brooks has never been close to anything close to that. So that is why I won't make that comparison, because at one point people were afraid of Marshawn Lattimore as like a truly shutdown corner. Dylan Brooks has just always talked big game and maybe plays some okay defense from time to time, but he is nowhere. He's never even reached that peak. That's the one thing I'll say. But I do like the comparison because he is a total menace. I was cracking up. I was like, Marshawn, I was like, these young guys are dogging you, bro. You got to stop. Like, this does not look good for you, man. Don't do that.
Yeah, hopefully he plays better next year, but it'll be a lot of fun having him and A.J. Brown going back and forth twice a year, similar to Mike Evans, assuming Marshawn Lattimore can, have a more complete season next year. But that'll be an interesting dynamic.
I don't know if it's going to be very fun for you, Evan. I'm going to be honest with you, man.
Well, so this is my take. Like mid-season trades, it's similar in baseball. They like rarely work out, especially when you're trading for that like disgruntled veteran. Because like to play an elite level in the NFL, like obviously I don't know for personal experience, but just from, listening to players that have played in the league, you have to be so tuned in on a daily basis, doing both from a health standpoint to keep your body right. And also from just a practice and getting reps in. Like, I don't care how long you've been in the league. You have to be grinding day in and day out, or you will get passed by younger players in the league. And like, you cannot tell me that Marshawn Lattimore was like engaged on a day-to-day basis playing for the Saints and like it contributed to his health. So he's still like, he's not in his like size side. He's not prime Marshawn Lattimore, but there's no way that he should not be able to play better than he played in the 5 games with us. So unfortunately that's how it goes with those midseason trades. Like it's just a guy that hasn't really been putting in the work this year because he wasn't happy where he was. And unfortunately that's how it goes a lot of times. So,
And to clarify, I have no doubt that with the full off season, especially with a guy like Dan Quinn, who does a great job of putting all the veterans together, that he's going to do well. My thing is more that it's exactly what we just talked about. He's not the Marshawn Lattimore of old, and sure, part of that might have been he was on a team that didn't motivate him to be good the last couple of years. But even then, like he's definitely, I believe, probably lost a step over the years, and that's more my concern because it wouldn't be an issue if he was your second best corner and you had a veteran corner who was lined up against, across from another great elite level cornerback, and then you had a secondary. What's going to make it important is how you handle your personnel in the offseason on your defense, because your defense definitely needs improvements in order for them. Like Jaden and your offense was good enough to win this year. I don't think your defense was, and that's the differentiator. But guys like Frankie Louisville and them are great building blocks. He had a couple like Palomalo moments in that game, which was impressive. I think maybe he started feeling himself a bit too much with the offsides after that. But a couple of those like blitzes where he read the snap were so impressive. I was like, that is like just he's an intelligent player. And your line's off is obviously solid. Like maybe it could be a bit of a better pass rush, but they did a pretty decent job overall against an elite offensive line, I'd say. Maybe not against the run game, but just in terms of like versatility. But yeah, that secondary, like it needs to be completely revamped.
That's not true at all, though. Like
I feel that way. I definitely feel that way.
The pass rush is the biggest issue. The secondary will need one more. But Mikey Sanders still is like a defensive rookie of the year kind of candidate. Like the dude's an absolute stud. Quan Martin's a solid safety. Jeremy Chin played at a Pro Bowl level this year. Now there's a lot of guys that are on 1-year deals that need to be replaced. I think they need to generate more pass rush, and also like the run defense on the defensive line was horrible. Like Payne and Allen are big names, but they haven't been good the last 2 years at all. And I think John Allen will be gone because they have a big dead cap they can save. So I think the defensive line is the biggest issue. They'll need one more corner because our slot corner is going on, and it'll be interesting if they try to add more of like an outside corner or a slot, because Sanders still can do both. But I'm less concerned. I mean, it hinges a lot on Lattimore, definitely. He needs to play obviously well, and then they'll add one. But I think D-line, get a better pass rush. be able to stop the run. The question, do you want to run it back with Wagner another year? He had an amazing year, but obviously it's, 1 year closer to father time for him. So, or do you want someone else in there? So there's a couple questions, but it'll be interesting to see where they go from a personnel. But like, I'm not that concerned about the corner room.
I think we're on the same page about, this is just my opinion, but I think we're on the same page about the pass rush. Clearly you need a better pass rush. I didn't think about the fact that John will be leaving in the offseason. So yeah, your interior line probably needs, but I guess the way I was thinking of it was they're talented enough where maybe you could find some magic with that versus other positions. I just don't believe there's enough talent in your secondary. Your safeties are solid, but they're not. I guess what I'm saying is they can't make up for the fact that your corners are going to get beaten by the elite teams. But the point that I'm trying to make,
I don't think they will long term though. I mean, Sanderson's a rookie and he was out there competing with some of the best in the sport.
But my point is, I don't like competing is one word. Getting beaten by them is another. Like that. Like this is just my opinion though. Like you might be right, and your secondary better than me. They might prove me wrong. But my point though is that I'm not talking about you guys competing for the playoffs. I already am thinking of you guys as a team that's perennially going to be competing for the playoffs. So you're definitely good enough to continue to do that. My thought is, how do you beat the Eagles? How do you beat the Chiefs? How do you beat the Bills? Well, I mean, the Lions, I would say, was their whole defense was gone. I mean, that's not an excuse, but I'm just saying, like, I'm talking about the teams that are like elite, like the best teams in the league, the ones that you would need to beat to win a Super Bowl. What is the difference? And for me, pass rush is obviously number one, but I just think you're just going to need an elite pass rusher. Your secondary, I think, will be something you can address a bit easier. But I just think as currently constructed against teams like with AJ Brown and Amon-Ra St. Brown and guys like that, they're just gonna it's gonna be a bit too easy for them. That's just my opinion.
Well, but the other defense, maybe we're going a little long here, but like the Commanders didn't really do the game plan that I suggested, which was like kind of let Saquon like have his 4 to 5 yards of play and just contain the big run. They stacked the box against him to try and stop him. The entire game was 1-on-1. There are not many corners in the league that can shut down AJ Brown 1-on-1. And obviously Sanders still's a rookie. So it was more like game plan that completely hung them out to dry. Which made them look way worse than, I mean, I'm not, again, Lattimore did not play well. I'm not suggesting that he did, but like, the run defense is what needs to be fixed is my point. And that starts on the defensive line.
That's fair too.
And obviously, $100 million, a lot of that'll go to another corner. Depending on what they do with, or if they want to re-sign Noah Igbenegbu, who had a great year, but I mean, they have to figure out how to stop the run, and then that'll make everything else easier, and then find a pass rusher. But
yeah, and the only reason I said it was because I just felt like it'd be easier to find a high-end corner in free agency or to draft one than a pass rusher. Like obviously you need a pass rusher, but it's a harder position to replace. You just need to figure out a way to develop one. But corner, you can immediately go add an elite level one. You might have to pay a lot, but you have the money for it. So that's really what I'm saying. But
Michael Parsons 2026, baby.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it. I mean, to clarify, I'm picking at Hay here because I'm talking about how do you become the fact that we're in a situation where we're talking about how do you win the Super Bowl and we're not talking about like how do you win more than 8 games is what shows the where you're at right now versus me and Zach's team who have a long way to go before we have that conversation. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Move on to the Bills Chiefs, or you got anything else, Zach?
Sean Lee's available, 38-year-old middle linebacker from the Dallas Cowboys.
I think we're all right. Actually, I had one more shout out. Dallas Goedert was a menace in that game.
Yeah, he's a beast.
Yeah, he's a dog.
They're just so talented. Like we'll talk about previewing the Chiefs game, but they're just the talent across that entire roster is just ridiculous.
I think you guys honestly were going back too much on the Commanders and the Eagles. Like to sum it up, the Eagles were better. The Eagles were a better team. We kind of knew that to start. We knew that before this game. We were definitely going to let Evan, not bet against his team. I respect that. And I think he was kind of fighting that feeling a little bit. But deep down, all of us knew that the Eagles were a much better football team.
I don't think he was fighting that feeling. I think it's fair to assume he could have won the road and beat him. But I think overall, from the multiple matchups we watched, I felt the Eagles were the better team in terms of
Yeah.
They had to play a clean game and get some help from Jalen not playing too well, and he was lights out. So that was kind of
the big brother. They were the big brother that whole game. I hate to say it, but dude, it was so imminent in that game. The Eagles were just the big brother, and the Commanders were like the pesky little brother that was trying to, come out on top.
As a whole, yes, the Saquon narrative has bothered me a little bit because they held him to like 4 yards a carry outside of the first big run. Now, obviously, so they actually did really well on Saquon. I mean, obviously that's part of it, but I actually thought the run defense did really well. Granted, the game plan was to stack the box, so you'd hope you can limit him, but it really was Jalen Hurts in the pass offense that killed us.
Sure,
so
but my point is, like, if you're stacking the box,
right.
Like if you're stacking the box, sure, 4 yards, but then you can't let up multiple like over 50-yard runs, and that's why Saquon's elite, because this is the argument I made coming into the year. Even on the Giants, he was putting up ridiculous numbers for a couple of years before he got hurt. With a terrible offensive line and no passing game, in this situation, it's just he's unstoppable. It's actually unfair. One last thing I want to say. I know we're going long, but I don't care because we're only talking about 2 games. The coaching, I just want to say this to Eagles fans. This is why I can't stand Philly fans. Y'all 2 years ago, were coming for Nick Sirianni's head the year after you made it to the Super Bowl and lost. And now, a couple years later, you're in the Super Bowl again after you spent the last 2 years absolutely destroying this man. Whether you like him or not, like, be consistent. Y'all are such whack fans, man. You get so hyped when your team is good, and then you call for all your players and your coaches' heads when they're bad, and then you jump on the same bandwagon when they make the Super Bowl. It's just whack. Like, I'm coming for all of y'all. Like, do better. Like, y'all have no consistency, and you want to talk smack, and now the same team took you to the Super Bowl again. So I don't want to hear any nonsense from y'all. Just appreciate you're there. And if you win a Super Bowl, I'm not giving any of y'all credit. I'm giving the team and the coaches the credit. That's all I want to say there.
From one fan base to another, the Bills just absolutely gutted again for is this 4 years now they lost to the Chiefs in the playoffs. So great back and forth game. Yeah, I was just with a Bills fan before this, actually, so shout him out. He's quite disappointed, but I mean, both quarterbacks played well. The only turnover was by the Chiefs, though, so it seemed like that gave the Bills a window. But I did think the Chiefs, just watching it, were the better team. But the Bills had a shot at the end, and they just couldn't get it done. Shout out Spagnuolo for that crazy corner blitz on the last play.
Oh, my gosh.
Obviously, the refs helped the Chiefs out a little bit once again with a couple of spots, but I don't know who wants to go first with the –
Yeah, I can take it. So I watched that game with a bunch of Bills fans, and it was actually really disheartening because so Alexa's stepbrother and her stepdad, they're like from Buffalo, so they're huge Bills fans, and they were actually going to go to the Super Bowl if the Bills won. So it was really gut wrenching. And Matthew watches this podcast, so he's gonna listen to this, but he was very, very gutted, but he handled it like a man. He was very, very chill about it, way more chill than I would have ever been with the Falcons losing like the Super Bowl and the AFC or NFC conference championship, right at that point. But they were literally going to go to the Super Bowl if they won. So knowing how that game came down to the wire, it was super close. Bills fans thought it was going to be their year. They had actually pulled away to a lead, right? They were actually looking at a 29-21 lead late in the fourth quarter, but then the Chiefs did the Chiefs. And I want to give credit to not only Spagnuolo for that corner blitz, but Andy Reid with that pass, like that passing play on the third down. That was a high efficiency passing play. So even if they didn't get the first down, they were still going to churn the clock just because of how the play was orchestrated with these crisscross routes and then the halfback out on the flank towards the flat. It was just a beautiful play call, and it just reemphasized to me what you guys have been saying all season. And although I give tons of credit to Joe Brady and what he's done for this Bills offense, there is nothing like an Andy Reid orchestrated offense. It is next level elite, dealing with less talent, you could argue, than the Bills offensive roster, and they still were able to get it done. And final thing, before I turn this over to Big Man Cy, and then I gotta take it because I have been heavy on the Bills this year, and I will happily take it. I do want to give credit to the Chiefs for their response attack. Whenever the Bills scored a touchdown or made some miraculous play, I'm talking like the Mac Hollins rainbow catch, beautiful throw by Josh Allen to stay in that game. The Chiefs responded back, whether it was a big kickoff return or like a special teams play or just a very efficient offensive response. The Chiefs had their problems, like Evan mentioned. They did turn the ball over. But ultimately, they responded when they need to, and they always kept the game close. there was no point in this game where the Bills were going to pull away because the Chiefs were just keeping it neck and neck. So I give a lot of respect to them. And Sai, I will turn it over your way.
I was going to let Evan go first, but since you already teed me up, I'm happy to do it. First and foremost, I just want to give Zach a shout out because honestly, if it was just me and Evan betting, the moment Zach texted us after the Bills got their first lead in the game and said, "Oh, it's about to get bad for the Chiefs," I would have said, "Evan, we need to put all of MDS's money on the Chiefs right now, immediately." Because the moment you said that, I was like, "This game is over. The Chiefs are coming back. They're winning this." All right, look, we got into it last week, so I'm not going to get all hostile this week. There's absolutely no need to. All I'm going to say is, Zach, how is it that you continue to paint this narrative in your own mind? You tell us everyone else is crazy for betting on the Chiefs based on last year, and you keep ending up in this position. It's just rinse, recycle, repeat, man. I implore you for next year for our own bank accounts to start to just appreciate how ridiculously unbeatable this team is. And when I say unbeatable, it's not because their talent level is higher or whatever it is. It's just because they're this well-oiled machine, and it starts from the top and it goes all the way to the bottom. Even the players that aren't big names make massive plays in big moments because they put themselves in a position to do it. It starts with the coaching. The first thing I want to talk about is Spagnuolo should be getting paid the same amount of money as pretty much every head coach in the NFL outside of the top 5. I mean, he is that elite in terms of the way he runs his defense. I mean, you're playing Josh Allen. Josh Allen made some ridiculous plays when guys were in his face, hitting him, grabbing his foot and whatever. He was making elite level plays that only 2 guys or I don't know, top 5 in the NFL could possibly do. Maybe, maybe I'll say 3 guys can do. And with that, they still managed to get home more times than I would ever expect anyone to do against Josh Allen. So got to give credit there. And he's also so genius at how he sends blitzes and when he times them. It's just so he's just perfect with it. It's ridiculous. But the flip side of that though is what's crazy is if you told me that you're going to go into this game and what did Travis Kelce have under 20 yards? If you told me Travis Kelce was going to have under 20 yards and the Chiefs are going to win this game, I think most people would have laughed at us. That's a crazy notion. But that's what makes Mahomes in my mind so inevitable, right? It's you can dial up whatever with him. You can get random guys MVS making big plays. Juju Smith-Schuster 5 years after his prime making big plays. You can get guys Xavier Worthy throughout the course of the year, even though he struggled, getting better and better and better. It's so crazy because a week ago they played the Texans and Travis Kelce absolutely ate. And then this week they tried to take Kelce away and then they got all these other receivers involved, even though they don't have one elite one. And shout out Hollywood Brown. He comes back and has a good game. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is Mahomes just finds a way. The play calling is great by Reed. Of course, I'm not taking that away from him. He's going to be a Hall of Fame, one of the greatest coaches ever. But Mahomes with his RPOs and his choices to run when he ran, which is what I think was a true game changer because the Bills, even when they were taking the passing away, Mahomes would always pick the right moment to get his 10-yard scramble, get his first down, whatever. He is just so unstoppable. We'll talk about the calls in a minute. Obviously, some went in the favor of the Chiefs. There's no denying that. But the point that I'll also make before we say, oh, the Bills won this game, some people are the Chiefs won this game, some people do in the media or amongst friend groups and stuff, because the Chiefs get the calls. You still need to convert when you get the ball back. And in the second half, every single time they got the ball, they put points on the board, either a touchdown or a field goal. That's one thing that for some reason people just don't give. I don't think people give Mahomes as much credit for as he deserves. So I could rant about him all day. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it after Evan goes and talk about the calls and stuff, but it is just inevitable. They're just inevitable. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that. I mean, I think Simon noted that last week where the biggest advantage amongst these two teams is the coaching. I've never been a big Sean McDermott, big game coach, and Chase Daniel, I think it was, had a good breakdown of some of the instances and some of the decisions over the course of the game that made a big difference. And he pointed out the Bills chasing points early, going for those 2-point conversions to try and whatever it was, tie the score as opposed to be down 1, kind of decisions. The Commanders did a similar thing. And he pointed out 2 things. One, obviously, that if you don't get it, you end up falling way behind. I don't think they ever really got it. But the other interesting thing you mentioned is that you like usually over the course of a game plan, right? You maybe have like 3 or 4 like really good 2-point plays that also could be used in other like short 4th and short type thing. And they're just like burning them in the first half to try and like get this extra point early in the game when you don't even know if you need it. It might even work against you, as I think it did in this game when the Bills actually could have used those extra points. Whereas Andy Reid and Spags, like they saved their best calls for the end of the game because, like Zach said, you can't blow out the Chiefs. So I was so insane that you said the Bills are going to beat it by 10 plus because you just cannot blow the Chiefs out. They're going to keep it close. And they're going to have their best plays in their back pocket. Like, that was Samaje Peride's first touch of the entire game. Like, that's not coincidence. They drew that play up. They knew it would work. They saved it for the most important play of the game, and they used it right there. The corner blitz, I'm sure, is the same, unless of the defensive scheme guy, but obviously it was brilliant. The Bills had no idea it was coming, and Spags saved it for what would seem like a risky call in that moment, but it's one over the course of a game plan is going to work, and you save those plays to the end, whereas the Bills maybe used too many of their bullets early. So I thought that was a really interesting narrative, and otherwise I don't have too much to add. As for the calls, I thought the 4th down call wasn't like that egregious. It was really hard to tell how far Josh got, but like the play before, Dalton Kincaid clearly got the first down, and no one made a big deal about it because the Bills are like, oh, it's 4th and inches, we'll sneak it, we'll get it. But like the play before, they clearly got the first down, which is the thing that less people are talking about. So there were a few spots overall. I don't think there was anything too major, but those spots were, obviously if they go down and make it an 8-9 point game, like it's a very different conversation. So
it's
honestly, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, honestly, I didn't really see the calls being that much of a factor. I really didn't. I mean, there was a couple of ball spot issues, right? But ultimately, this game is won in the trenches, right? And if you can't convert when you got big Chris Jones and that Kansas City defense, which figured out a will, and when there's a will, there's a way. Like they made the plays when it mattered, and they're 12-0 in like 1 possession games this season. They're incredible. I mean, these guys, like, they leave it on the field, and in order to beat the Chiefs, you have to execute on so many different things. So I just think, it's very easy for people to dismiss that by saying, the ball spotting issue. I would agree with you. I think that Josh Allen got the first down, but I also think it was really close, and I understand where the refs were coming from, even after taking a second look at it. So I don't know. I think people are really harping on the insignificant parts of the game, which did look significant because it was the end of the game, but there were 80, 90 plays that were called right throughout that whole game, 60 minutes of football. And the Chiefs just were better on the majority of those plays. So I just don't really focus too much on that stuff. And the only other thing I want to say is Andy Reid is the best coach in the NFL in history. I keep hearing the Lombardi trophy, right? Vince Lombardi, he built Lambeau Field. The reason why Green Bay has a football team is because of Vince Lombardi. And I want to say that Andy Reid has toppled that position. He has toppled Vince Lombardi in his pedigree. I'm not sure which other coaches you guys would have on your Mount Rushmore, but Andy Reid, for what he has done in Philadelphia with Donovan McNabb and that team, and then Michael Vick and that team, and kind of resurging Vick's career, and then going to Kansas City and just having an even more successful part of his career is just unstoppable. Andy Reid is the best head coach in NFL history, and I will stand by that.
I mean, it's hard for me to argue against that. I think Bill Belichick is probably the one most people compare him to in the context of, because Bill has over 5 Super Bowl trophies. But the thing that I will point out, though, is it's more how, like, ruthless they are. Like, they go for the jugular. And the reason I say that is if you think about the first half, the Chiefs had the lead. And I don't know if you guys remember, they were on their side of the field with a 4th and 2 or a 4th and 1. It wasn't like a 4th and inches. And they went for it. And I was just like, in my mind, I was like, this is wild, because how many teams, as the team that's favored at home, having the ball on your side of the field, would go for it? I would expect most teams to just be like, okay, I'm going to punt this ball because, like, we have the lead. Our defense is great. They're like, no, we're playing against Josh Allen. Like, yeah, we might be favored, but we're not giving him any opportunities when we feel like we can. And then they ran this beautiful bootleg with Mahomes, and like, it was just like, how do you account for Mahomes running in that situation? Like, you're so concerned about Kelsey beating you, you're so concerned about Pacheco beating you, whatever it is. It's things like that that made the difference. The other point I'll make is whether the 4th down conversion was a first down or not. The issue that I have is people making it seem like that was like the main reason the Chiefs won the game. Because the reality is, if you watch the NFL, like, and you go see who the better team was and who was better coached, I just feel like it was glaringly obvious that was the Chiefs. I really believe the only reason the game was this close is because Josh did everything he could, given the circumstances that he had, to try to win this game, even when the chips were down. Like, he had to make some ridiculous plays. Now, to be fair, he also made some awful throws in the first half where he is very lucky they didn't get intercepted. In those first couple of drives, I was like, bro, what are you doing? Like, that's just not what I expected out of Josh. But then he figured it out and started making big plays, like you were talking about the Mac Hollins throw. And really, if you think about it, if Mahomes and Pacheco don't have that fumble handoff issue, or whoever the running back was, if they don't have that fumble handoff issue, it might not have even been that close. Like, that was such like a fluke play for them to fumble on a handoff that you never see. And that ended up being a 14-point turnaround because the Chiefs were in a position where they were very likely going to score a touchdown. They fumbled that. The Bills recovered. They come back to score a touchdown, and you go into halftime with a very different score, right? So I'm just saying, in so many ways, the Chiefs just looked like a better overall team, which is honestly not that obvious of a statement coming into the game, because I think Evan has mentioned it multiple times. People make it seem like the Bills, like, it's all Josh and they don't have like talent. Like, the reality is, I think they have more talent than they get credit for, and that's why this was a closer game than I think it might have been, with Josh being elite. And I think we focus a lot on the Chiefs, but I will say this: great season for the Bills. I do feel for the fans. I feel for Josh. I mean, he obviously played very well. But there's something very weird, and I remember watching this on First Take like a couple days ago, or I was watching a video of it earlier today. I just can't understand how they're 4-1 in the regular season against the Chiefs. Josh is, and he's won with all kinds of different personnel. Why is it that every time they play in the playoffs, they can't get over the hump and the Chiefs win? That part is what is really distinguishing it for me. It kind of feels like the back in the day, the Brady versus everybody else kind of argument, whether it was Manning or whatever else. It's just, I don't know. And it's not like he plays bad. I just can't figure out what it is that, like, where it's like, how can you be so good in the regular season against this team, and then every time you play them in the playoffs, they take your lunch money. And last year was in Buffalo. This year was in Kansas City. So it's not even like, I don't know. I don't know what you guys think of that.
I feel like it could come down to the kind of the similar logic that you have within a game and you come to coaching. Like, maybe the Bills just use like way more of their like bullets from a season long perspective. I don't know, but their defense is always a little bit short as well, which tends to be a big issue. But the whole QB sneaks situation has me just irked. Like, I think it's kind of a microcosm of, and it comes back to Joe Brady as well, that like, from the first time they ran that in this game, you could tell that the Chiefs were going to be able to stop it. I think the first time they ran it, they got it, but it was because Josh just, like, he's such a massive human being that he just was able to push through. But like, the Chiefs knew that they only go left, as Romo and Nance or whoever called it out during the broadcast. And the Bills never deviated off that, and they never ran any other plays. And like, James Cook was running really well in that game. Like, the Chiefs just have so many plays in that situation that can beat you, and the Bills just refused to change off of it, and they were very stubborn with it all the way up to the very end. And it just was a very weird look to me that the Chiefs clearly had it covered basically the entire game, and like, sure, you're going to get it once in a while, but it clearly was not there, and they just really tried to force it in, and they just didn't have any other options to go to, it didn't seem. So I don't know. I have a bit of a struggle to say, like, I never really totally thought the Chiefs were going to lose, because like, if they do get a better spot there, I think like,
no, there's a chance
they probably would win the game, honestly. I mean, they're almost in field goal and eventually touchdown range, or, obviously they still would have had to move the ball a little bit, but that's a tough one. It's a tough one.
I think it depends on if they score a touchdown there or not. But even if they scored a touchdown, if they didn't get a 2-point conversion, then the Chiefs get the ball. And for me, my money would be on Mahomes coming back and answering, because it's just what he does, right? But nothing is guaranteed. I think that would have been a massive play. But I'm so glad you brought that up, though, Evan, because the reality is, if you truly want to convert on fourth down, stop doing the same damn thing every single time when it's not working, as you alluded to, especially when we saw on other plays where they gave Josh the ball in shotgun with a running back next to him. And that makes it incredibly more difficult for a defense when you have a running back with a head of steam, a quarterback with a head of steam who can run, and then a really good running back next to him where they can run these options or whatever and give the defense a different look. I don't understand why they're trying to tush push. It's not the Eagles' offense, and that might have been the difference. Actually, I agree that they might have converted more for a fourth downs if they were smarter about that. And one last thing, can we give a huge shout out to James Cook for that ridiculous extension on the fourth and one touchdown? If he doesn't put his hand on the ground and reach that ball across, that game was over right there. I mean, that was unbelievable, man. What a dog.
Yeah, it was a great game. It really was. That was a fantastic game. I'm looking forward to the Super Bowl. Now, are we going to do a podcast next week where we talk about the Super Bowl, or are we making our projections today?
Here's what I'm thinking. I think we dive into the game now. I don't think we can hold each other to formal picks now with so much time to go. So you have the flexibility to. I think we should do a preliminary pick now, and then if you have the flexibility to change. And then next week, I think we do like strictly a betting episode. So obviously we'll talk more about the game as we've kind of had thoughts to deep dive into it. But I think we should look at, just like come ready with prop bets and things we like for that game, do maybe a shorter episode, but give people a sense on what the betting looks like so we can, and then do a little bit more analysis next week. But I think we should get the ball rolling a little bit. Just on preliminary thoughts of these two teams. So.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be super long.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think?
All right, so I'll start us off here. So my initial thoughts are the Philadelphia Eagles are the definition of efficiency in a very balanced offense. And as a result, and due to the fact that the Eagles start out the games fast and establish the run game, and in every single one of their playoff games, they've taken an early lead, and then they sustain that lead, and then they eventually just pull away. That's just happened, right? I mean, there was that scare against the Rams, but the Eagles were the first one. I think the Rams actually drew blood, but the Eagles established control by the end of the first half, and then they kind of carried that forward. And then obviously with Washington, they steamed right full ahead. So I think the Eagles have a huge benefit with starting early and then sustaining the game, playing it their way, and leveraging Saquon in the run game to dominate those one-on-one matchups through the air as they set up the play action and whatnot. The key is for Jalen Hurts to remain efficient. If he starts making mistakes, it's going to be a bad day. And I think that the Chiefs will make incredible plays, but they do typically start slower than other teams, and they kind of pick up speed as they go through the game. So my preliminary thoughts are that if Jalen Hurts minimizes the turnovers and they have this well-oiled machine and they get Saquon going early, which he has historically done, give me the Eagles to win this game by a field goal. It's hard because both of these teams are so equally matched, but I think that the kicker will be Philadelphia remaining consistent, establishing the lead early, and then sustaining that with a veteran defense with great corners and a fantastic pass rush. Give me the Eagles by 3 and a tight one.
I like it. So my initial thought was that I don't know how anyone beats this Eagles roster. Could be some bias coming off losing to them and the Commanders, but like it's just so loaded top to bottom. The offense, which will be fully healthy next week. Obviously, they had some issues in the Commanders game, but best offensive line in the league. As I mentioned earlier, arguably the best receiving core in the league. Dallas Goedert, best running back in the league. And then Jalen Hurts just needs to do his thing, and he looked great in the Commanders game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, like best defensive line in the league, arguably. The Chiefs have a great one as well, like Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, absolute menaces. Zach Bond, Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And then the secondary with the rookies out there, Cooper DeJean in the slot. And, what is the nickname?
Quentin Mitchell.
Quintanamo Bay or whatever he calls himself. Mm-hmm. And then Slay, CJ, all those guys. Like it's just unbelievable. And then I'm starting to pivot back, and I was surprised they were underdogs. Actually, I kind of thought the Eagles would be favored, to be honest with you. And the interesting stat that I came across was this whole Patrick Mahomes is 8-0 against Vic Fangio defenses in his career, which is insane. Now, obviously, that's been on some bad teams. Like it's not, and I'm trying to decide how much I want to read into that stat. But the one thing about Fangio is like he's had good defenses, but he doesn't really do anything special or creative like Spags does. He's just going to sit in like a too high shell. He's going to let his pass rush eat. And he's not really going to do anything that fools you. And Pat Mahomes will just happily dink and dunk his way all the way down the field and be able to score, which is why I started to maybe lean into that having some merit as an argument. And then on the Chiefs side, I think they're the one defense that they're beatable on the ground, but I think they'll be able to contain the big runs because they tackle so well. So I think Saquon will get his 4 to 5 yards a carry, but I think they'll be able to limit an explosive like 80-yard touchdown run, which will be huge. And then Jalen looked great against the Commanders, but the looks he was getting were so simple, like what we talked about earlier. The entire game was basically just, all right, I've got my one-on-one with A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. I can just throw it up. And even then, he was passing on a lot of those opportunities. Like, Brady was kind of roasting him the entire game. Like, dude, it's one-on-one with A.J. Brown, one of the best, receivers in the league. Just throw the ball. And he was, taking some sacks that he maybe didn't need to take. Now, he was putting the ball in a great spot, but he did choose to throw it. So that maybe worries me a little bit about Jalen not having as good a game. Now, he's not going to turn the ball over. I know, Zach, you mentioned, like he's not going to turn it over. My worry is he going to be too cautious and he's going to take sacks with a great pass rush, a great blitz scheme from Spags? Because it seemed like as great as he played against the Commanders, there were still spots where he wasn't seeing it as well as he's going to need to in the Chiefs game. So I'm still very torn. I think maybe I'm back on the Chiefs right now. I do think it's going to be lower scoring, under 49.5, because I think the Eagles are going to, I think there's going to be a good amount of sacks on Jalen in this game. I don't think he's going to turn it over, but I think they're going to get sputtered by the defense a little bit. And then I think the Chiefs, they might be able to move the ball consistently, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of explosive plays. So I think they'll maybe dink and dunk their way down the field. So you turned me on to a good idea, Zach. How about Eagles have the lead at halftime, and then the Chiefs come back and win, as they seem to always do in the Super Bowl, because Patrick Mahomes tends to start slow in the Super Bowl as well.
Well, yeah, the last 2 Super Bowls, he's been down 2 possessions, and then I bet personally on them to come back, and then he's made me a lot of money because that's what he does. Normally, I would give Zach crap for picking against the Chiefs again because it's a consistent thing. It's a consistent thing that Zach has done for years. But the one thing I will say though, Zach, is I'm not going to give you crap this time because I totally understand why you think the Eagles might win this game, and I think. Like logically speaking, if you're just looking at like team layout, I was talking to other people about this. The Eagles have the best team on paper out of probably anyone in this entire playoffs with the injuries that Detroit had on the defense. And it is boring that we're getting a Super Bowl rematch that we had from a couple years ago from the standpoint of it being the same 2 teams again. But in the context of the best game we could get, this is actually the best game I think we could have gotten when it comes down to the best coach and the best quarterback against the most elite team that still remains. And in my opinion, I think the Eagles were better than even the Ravens and the Bills coming into this.
They would have murdered the Bills, I think.
I actually, I definitely think I would have picked the Eagles. The funny thing is I actually was really hoping, one of the reasons I wanted Commanders Chiefs was to see if Zach would finally be stuck in a position where he had to pick the Chiefs for the first time ever, because I feel like obviously he was struggling a bit more to pick the Commanders, but we'll get back to that. The conversation I'm going to have is, this game comes down to what I just mentioned. It's if the Chiefs are going to win this game, it's going to be because Mahomes is that much better than everyone else on the field, and because Andy Reid and Eric Spagnuolo coach their asses off. Because in order to beat this Eagles team, especially if Jalen isn't going to turn the ball over, that needs to happen. Because talent-wise, especially offensively, Mahomes doesn't have a lot. Like, we're going to need Kelsey to be extremely smart and find areas to get open for us to watch a game where the Chiefs might win. But the other thing I will say, though, is I think this game comes down to the Chiefs' offensive line versus the Eagles' defensive line, especially when they're rushing 4. If they can do a halfway decent job of not getting too much pressure on Mahomes with the 4-man rushes, then I think the Chiefs win this game, because I think that allows Mahomes the time to dink and dunk, as you're talking about, Evan, and kind of pick his spots and whatnot. The Eagles' defense is significantly better than any other defenses they played. But at this point, how can I pick against Mahomes when I would argue that most Super Bowl matchups he's been in, along with most of the games he's played in prior years' playoffs, the teams that he's played against, I would argue, had more talent than his own team at that point, especially after Tyreek Hill left and they were more reliant on Kelsey. And he's found a way to win no matter what. And that's kind of how I see this going. I think the Eagles are going to look good. but I think the Chiefs are just going to win because Mahomes is that much better than everyone else. And this is really tough for me because I still think Saquon's going to have a great game. But we're talking about like outside of my Gamecocks, like my two favorite like non-Colts players in this game. Like you guys know how much I'm on the Mahomes and Saquon train, and I always have been with those guys. So it's really tough for me because I love both those guys, and I know both of them will be elite. But I mean, it's Mahomes, man, and it's Reed and it's Spags, and I just think when you need that one big play that's going to make the difference, as we alluded to, because you never see the Chiefs get blown out, I think they're going to make that play, and I think that's what it's going to come down to. But I do believe this will be a really good game, and I'm not like going out here being like, oh yeah, the Chiefs are going to easily win this. I don't feel that way at all. I think this is going to be a great game, and I'm actually really happy with this matchup from the standpoint of if you want to see great football in terms of like when the playoffs started, especially with the what Detroit and everything and the Lions injuries, this is the matchup that I think I would have wanted.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is the best matchup, and I think these are the best two teams in football. And I'm curious to get which specific matchup are you most looking forward to? Because I think that Cooper DeJean covering one of the slot receivers, whether it's Hollywood Brown or Juju, will cause the Chiefs a lot of problems in those short dink and dump routes when CJ Gardner Johnson is blanketing Travis Kelce and they can't get that, that quick option to convert on those 3rd and 4s and those 3rd and 3s. So if Cooper DeJean is able to plug those gaps and cover those kind of, you could say, washed receivers, then I think that could make the challenge even more daunting for the Chiefs because they're going to rely on a rookie receiver to really get them up and down the field. Obviously, schematically, Andy Reid's going to draw up something to give, like fresh looks right for that Chiefs offense. But I do think Cooper DeJean in that slot versus one of those like receivers well past his prime could work very favorably for the Eagles in this game, knowing that CJ Gardner Johnson is going to have a tall order covering Kelce, and I think he'll cover him pretty well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me it's going to be more scheme oriented. Like I mentioned with kind of the safe kind of too high shell. Like if I'm matching up receivers on corners, like I'm probably taking corners at every level. Whether, however, Mitchell on Hopkins, I'm definitely taking Mitchell. That dude's elite. DeJean on the other guys, I'll probably take Cooper and Slay on whoever. I'm probably taking the Eagles corner. I think Kelce as a security blanket could be big. He always, obviously has a big Super Bowl. So I more envision like a high reception game maybe from him. Just like, completing first downs like he always does, that type of thing. I think Kareem Hunt's going to have a good game. I think you can run the ball a little bit on the Eagles. So I think Kareem Hunt running the ball has looked good, can keep them honest. And I might go to the other side, like AJ Brown. Is it going to be Trent McDuffie on him? He's a little bit smaller, but he's an absolute stud. So I think that would be the matchup I would be most looking at, because I think the Eagles, like a lot of their pass game is just, my receivers are better than any of your corners, whether it's AJ Brown on a go ball with a one-on-one on the outside like they did a lot against the Commanders, or if it's on that 3rd down and 4 and you are a little too far to run the ball and you just bang the slant to AJ Brown off the play action or RPO kind of thing. Because I don't see Jalen having a ton of success on the ground in this one. Nor do I see Pat having a lot of success on the ground for this one because of how good these defenses are at corralling, rushing quarterbacks. So, I don't know though, man. That is like the talent thing is tough. Like,
yeah. No, Evan, you kind of took exactly what I was going to say. Outside of, I already talked about the Chiefs' offensive line versus the Eagles' defensive line, specifically with 4-man rushes. I'm not talking about blitzes. I think that's the big one for me. But then after that, when you mentioned McDuffie, Brown, that's exactly what I was going to say. But I think that's the difference maker, right? Because the Eagles up to this point have not played a defense, and I mean this with no offense to the other teams, but have not played a defense even close to the level of the Chiefs in the context of like how they like run schematically. But the reason Spags is so confident sending blitzes at the right time is because of guys like McDuffie. McDuffie, every single time I see them send an all-out blitz and someone throws the ball, the receiver McDuffie's covering is completely covered. I'm like, they can run any route they want, and he's in front of them. It's ridiculous how good he is. And then Justin Reed is a dog. Like he's just involved in every big play. He's the guy that like you give a guy a ball in space, and normally that guy's going to get like a big first down, and he'll hit him in the backfield and make the right play. And that's what I think is going to make the difference. And you guys were saying Jalen might not make mistakes. I actually believe this is the defense that's going to make him make a mistake, because I think what's going to happen is they're going to send enough blitzes where he's going to start getting like pressed with the sacks, like getting annoyed with the sacks. And I think eventually he's just going to try to rip one because he's tired of not being able to get the ball out. And I think that's when they make a big play. I do believe that will happen just because this defense is completely different. If you can blitz the Eagles with consistency and know that your corners are you like the thing is when he sends his blitz, Spagnuolo, no matter how good your offensive line is, you still usually only get like a second to get rid of that football. And I think their corners are good enough to hold these guys down for 1 second. They don't need more time than that to get home and make Jalen Hurts, chuck the ball out. So I think we'll see a turnover. They're just
Man, this is interesting. I see both sides. I see Sai's point completely. But then on Jalen Hurts' side, he's getting 2 weeks of recovery time. He's running pretty well on that knee. The concussion's kind of an afterthought here to finish the season. So, you could be looking at a dual threat quarterback that could really do some damage on the ground there.
Which helps Saquon a lot out too. But he was completely healthy in that Commanders game. Like his knee looked 100% fine. I didn't see any sign of weakness. They just kind of corralled him. And yeah, I think his mistakes will be in the form of sacks. Give me like 5+ sacks for the Chiefs defense, like exactly what Sai mentioned. But I think he'll be a little too cautious in terms of holding on to the ball. And, early on in the game when McDuffie's locking down A.J. Brown or whoever it might be, he might start holding that ball even longer. And
if that happens, they're not winning that game, though. Because there's
I was about to say, because you're leaning the Chiefs.
Yeah, it's the Chiefs defense. If he takes 5 sacks, that's probably 5 drives where you might get that stop because that ends up being like, imagine if you end up in over 3rd and 10 against the Chiefs on multiple, you're going to lose the game because their defense is just too elite at stopping big plays in big moments. You know what I mean? Like the reason the Bills were able to keep that game as close as they did is they kept converting to 3rd and 1s or 3rd and 2s, and then we're able to keep getting first downs and resetting. If you take a bunch of sacks, then I don't know how you come back. There's no way.
Well, the Rams game is maybe a bad example because it was in the snow, but they had 7. That was the big problem in the snow game. Obviously, it's a different environment.
The Rams had 7 sacks?
The Rams had 7 sacks on them. Yeah.
But that's my point. I'm saying the Rams had 7 sacks, and they almost beat the Eagles. The Chiefs are considerably because the Chiefs are considered better. They're not going to let up.
That's why I do like the under because I think that the Eagles' defense will keep it close. I think the one way to beat the Chiefs, as we talked about with these elite quarterbacks, is you have to be able to rush with 4, and I think the Eagles will be able to an extent. And I think they'll keep them, maybe limit them to some field goals, keep it a lower scoring close game, and then. But I think the Chiefs leaning to saying the Chiefs will be too much and find a way to get it done, specifically with their defense. So
here's another matchup that's interesting that actually points the Chiefs' way is in the kicking. Jake Elliott has missed field goals and extra points over the last 2 games. Now, given one of the games was in the snow, but he even missed an extra point before the snow had even started to fall there in the first half. And then you look at Harrison Butker, and that dude is just automatic. Like, that guy's not going to miss, especially in cold weather. Now, I know it's a dome environment, but regardless, that dude's going to come prepared. Jake Elliott would be the one that would fumble because that's all he's done the last 2 games is he's missed a series of extra points. He missed 2 extra points in the divisional game. Then he missed the crucial field goal. He was over 1 for field goals in the last game. So something to consider.
He can't hit anything over 50 yards this year. So in a dome, you'd think he'd be okay, but his over 50 has been atrocious. Has been his big issue. So, that could be a factor.
This is as evenly matched as a game you could possibly imagine. This is really tough.
I really don't think it is, but it really just comes down to just talking about kicking, talking about coaching, we're talking about Mahomes. And more often than not, I'm just going to pick the better quarterback to win the game because, especially when you're I'm just going to say it. If he wins this, he's my GOAT. I understand Brady has more, but this man will have 3-peated and won 4 Super Bowls in 5 years. Just think about how ridiculous that is. Most guys go their entire career as top 5 players, MVP caliber players, hoping to get one. And even the one they get is so bare minimum, slim margin. We haven't even talked about this yet because that is how ridiculous he is that we've gotten to a point where he's in the Super Bowl 4 times for his 5th time before the age of 30, he's in the Super Bowl. And we're just treating it like it's just this inevitable thing, which is hilarious because it goes to show this guy rolls into the season every year and he's not thinking about training camp or the regular season. He's thinking about what do I got to do to win my next ring when I'm inevitably in the Super Bowl? It is actually ridiculous. I don't know if we'll ever see this again because people forget Brady won the majority of his in the back half of his career when he was in his 30s and he won a bunch. Like Mahomes, if he wins this, he's going to have 4 and 5 years, and he's not even 30 yet. He's probably got at least another, like, I don't know what we would say, like 8 to 10 years of football left in him. It's absurd. So, I don't know. This is a situation where, like, if he goes and beats the Eagles with how talented they are after he beat the 49ers with how talented they are, and to beat the other Eagles with how talented they are, he will have won 3 Super Bowls in which he played against the better team and won every single time. It's ridiculous, actually, if you think about it.
It's going to be tough. I mean, because if you look at compare these Eagles teams, this Eagles team I think is probably better than the one Mahomes faced last time. But Jalen Hurts isn't playing at quite as high a level either, so it's tough, man.
Personnel wise, you're right, Evan, because Saquon obviously like is a lead, and they got
the biggest difference. Yeah,
Jalen Carter and all these guys who were menaces, but Jalen Hurts was literally like. Some people were arguing he was as good as Mahomes going into that game, and he did play that way in the game. And then Mahomes still beat him because he was down 2 scores and still came back and won that game.
Yeah,
Hurts is nowhere near that right now. Like he's not even close to that. Like we had an argument like a couple weeks ago where Monhouse was trying to tell me he wasn't top 10. That I completely disagree with. But he's definitely like, he's definitely like in the cusp of the top 10. Maybe moves up after this playoffs, but he was like top 2 back then, or at least top 5. Mm-hmm. So. It's different. You're so right. This is going to be such a good matchup. Like, I think people are really underselling how fun the Super Bowl could be just because of the it being a rematch.
See, well, the Eagles are going to have to figure out a better plan for tight end because Zach Ertz went for like 10 catches at like 120 yards on him. So, and there's a little bit of a better tight end on the other side in this one. So I think that could be a big issue for them. But
you're not beating Kelsey one-on-one. He's too smart. He's got to in the zone. This is going to be something.
But I guess, what do you got? Oh, you got the John Bleeker.
Hey,
we'll have to hit it. We'll have to hit it, Jensen.
You know it.
I guess
we hit the gym through Chelsea Piers.
We can. I mean, those are the staples, right? Some basketball, John Bleeker, and the Super Bowl, right? I know we got a few more guests in town for this affair, but we can always sneak in the staple activities. But yeah, I guess we'll wrap up. Like I mentioned, hoping to do another podcast next year was exclusively kind of more of a betting episode. We'll come with like prop bets we like and kind of talk through in a little bit more detail situationally. We'll see how that goes. And then, I assume everyone knows by now, but Super Bowl New York City, be here or be square, as it were. Should be a good time. Thanks as always for listening. And that was Mondays Down South.